Cochise County in southeastern Arizona was the scene of a number of violent conflicts in the 19th century American Old West, including between white settlers and Apache Indians, between opposing political and economic factions, and between outlaw gangs and local law enforcement. Cochise County was carved off in 1881 from the easternmost portion of Pima County during a formative period in the American Southwest. The era was characterized by rapidly growing boomtowns, the emergence of large-scale farming and ranching interests, lucrative mining operations, and the development of new technologies in railroading and telecommunications. Complicating the situation was staunch resistance to white settlement from local Native American groups, most notably during the Apache Wars, as well as Cochise County's location on the border with Mexico, which not only threatened international conflict but also presented opportunities for criminal smugglers and cattle rustlers. Factional hostilities emerged as soon as American settlers began arriving in southern Arizona in large numbers in the 1860s and 1870s. The Gadsden Purchase of 1853 had opened the territory to Americans, and the sudden growth of settlement and investment proved a source of great enmity between local Apaches and the American newcomers. Pima County and later Cochise County were the primary battleground for most of the resulting quarter-century of warfare, which was almost constant in the region until the late 1880s. In addition to the Native American conflicts, there was also considerable tension between rural residents of Cochise County, who were for the most part Democrats from the agrarian Confederate states, and more urban residents living within the region's few developed towns, who were largely Republican business owners from the industrial Union states. The division created polarizing sectional alliances and culminated in countless local feuds, the most well-known of which has been called the Cochise County Feud or the Earp-Clanton Feud, which included the historic gunfight at the OK Corral in the town of Tombstone and Wyatt Earp's vendetta ride in the early 1880s. Dr. George E. Goodfellow famously described Tombstone, the capital of Cochise County, as the condensation of wickedness. Formation of Cochise County. The land that now comprises Cochise County, along with the rest of modern Arizona south of the Gila River and a small part of southwestern New Mexico, was Mexican territory until 1853, when it was purchased by the United States in the Gadsden Purchase. Cochise County was created on February 1, 1881 from the eastern portion of Pima County. It was named after the legendary Chiricahua Apache war chief Cochise, who was a pivotal figure in the Apache Wars before his death in 1874. The county seat was Tombstone until 1929, when it moved to Bisbee. Cochise County is almost a perfect square in the southeasternmost corner of the state, 83 by 84 miles, 134 by 135 kilometers. It covers a land area of 6,972 square miles, 18,060 square kilometers, 1.5 times the size of the state of Connecticut, and shares an 83-mile, 134 kilometers, border with the Mexican state of Sonora. The county also includes 2,000 square miles, 5,200 square kilometers, of the San Pedro River watershed. Most of Cochise County is dominated by basin and range topography, with high-altitude rocky plateaus and forested mountain ranges, including the Dragoon Mountains and the Chiricahua Mountains, separated by broad, low-lying valleys of Sonoran desert scrub. Dragoon Summit divides the county. Apache Wars. The Apache Wars were Arizona's and New Mexico's most prominent conflict for more than 30 years in the latter half of the 19th century, as well as one of the lengthiest conflicts in all of the Indian Wars. The land that is now Cochise County is located in the ancestral homeland of the Chiricahua Apache, who fiercely resisted American encroachment on their territory for decades. The Chiricahua War began during the American Civil War, when the New Mexico Territory, of which present-day Arizona was a part, had nominally joined the Confederate States of America, and both Union and Confederate armies vied for control of important emigrant trails and stagecoach routes passing through the area en route to California. Cochise and the Bascom Affair. In January 1861, a band of Apaches raided the ranch of John Ward, stole some livestock, and kidnapped the son of a Mexican woman who lived with Ward. Ward wrongly believed that the unrelated Chiricahua Apache chief Cochise and his followers were responsible, and he demanded that the United States Army confront Cochise, recover the livestock, and rescue the boy. A month later, the Army responded by sending Lieutenant George Nicholas Bascom and 54 men into Apache Pass, where several people had been massacred by the Chiricahuas in the past. After setting up camp about a mile from a Butterfield Overland Mailway station, Bascom lured Cochise and several of his relatives into his tent and threatened to hold him hostage until Ward's property and the boy were returned. Furious and insulted, Cochise cut through the wall of the tent, eluded the guards posted outside, and attempted to free the other hostages by offering to exchange them for several of his own prisoners. When Bascom refused, the Chiricahuas killed their prisoners, and Bascom responded by hanging Cochise's hostage relatives. The incident triggered a series of retaliations that soon erupted into full-scale war across a vast portion of southeastern Arizona and southwestern New Mexico. The fighting did not come to any significant end until 1886, when the Apache shaman Geronimo surrendered to the U.S. Army at Skeleton Canyon. But even after Geronimo's surrender, warriors like Masai and the Apache Kid continued to raid settlers' ranches for years into the 20th century. Battle of Apache Pass. Between 1861 and 1886, there were dozens of skirmishes between white soldiers or settlers and Apaches in Cochise County. The biggest of these battles occurred when Cochise and Mangas Colorados attempted to ambush a detachment of the California Column as it made its way east through Apache Pass in the Chiricahua Mountains. During the ensuing Battle of Apache Pass, on June 15, 1862, Captain Thomas L. Roberts and 126 men routed 500 Apaches from their fortified positions overlooking the area. 66 Apaches were killed while the Americans suffered only 5 casualties. The Army then built Fort Bowie to protect the trail that led through the pass. Conflicts and feuds. Rural versus town interests. Many of the ranchers and cowboys who lived in the Cochise County countryside were resentful of the growing power of the business owners and townspeople who increasingly influenced local politics and law in the county. A cowboy in that time and region was generally regarded as an outlaw. Legitimate cowmen were referred to as cattle herders or ranchers. 194. The ranchers largely maintained control of the country around Tombstone, due in large part to the sympathetic support of Cochise County Sheriff Johnny Bean, who favored the cowboys and rural ranchers and who grew to intensely dislike the Earps. Bean tended to ignore the Earps' complaints about the McClorys and Clantons' horse thieving and cattle rustling. The townspeople and business owners welcomed the cowboys who had money to spend in the numerous bordellos, gambling halls, and drinking establishments. When lawlessness got out of hand, they enacted ordinances to control the disruptive revelry and shootings. As officers of the law, the Earp brothers held authority at times on the federal, county and local level. They were resented by the cowboys for their tactics, as when Wyatt Earp buffaloed Curly Bill when he accidentally shot Marshal Fred White. 221. The Earps were also known to bend the law in their favor when it affected their gambling and saloon interests, which earned them further enmity with the cowboy faction. Under the surface were other tensions aggravating the simmering distrust. Most of the leading cattlemen and cowboys were Confederate sympathizers and Democrats from southern states, especially Missouri and Texas. The mine and business owners, miners, townspeople, and city lawmen, including the Earps, were largely Republicans from the northern states. There was also the fundamental conflict over resources and land, of traditional, Southern style, small government agrarianism of the rural cowboys contrasted to Northern style industrial capitalism. Lawmen versus outlaws. During the rapid growth of Cochise County in the 1880s at the peak of the silver mining boom, outlaws derisively called cowboys, frequently robbed stagecoaches and brazenly stole cattle in broad daylight, scaring off the legitimate cowboys watching the herds. It became an insult to call a legitimate cattleman a cowboy. Legal cowmen were generally called herders or ranchers. The lines between the outlaw element and law enforcement were not always distinct. Doc Holliday had a reputation as a killer, though modern research has only identified 3 individuals he shot. He was also friends with Bill Leonard, who was implicated in a stagecoach robbery. Cowboy Frank Stillwell was a known cattle rustler and served as an assistant sheriff under Cochise County Sheriff Johnny Bean. Cowboy and outlaw Texas Jack Vermillion was a friend of the Earps who deputized him after Virgil Earp was maimed in an ambush. Murder of Deputies Adams and Finlay. At the behest of Judge Charles Silent, Territorial Marshal Crawley Dake deputized John H. Adams and Cornelius Finlay 113 while traveling north to company headquarters in September 1878, less than 2 weeks after they were deputized. 5 Mexicans intercepted Adams and Finlay, who they believed were carrying gold ore, and killed them, but didn't find any ore. One of the suspects in their killing was Florentino Saez, who the Arizona Weekly Star identified as the 1878 murderer of Deputy U.S. Marshals Cornelius Finlay and John Hicks Adams on September 2, 1878. During the coroner's inquest into the death of Morgan Earp, Pete Spence's wife, Marietta Duarte, implicated her husband and 4 other men, including Florentino Cruz, in Morgan's murder. 248:176 Saez and Cruz may have been the same person. In 1879, the Mexican federal government refused to allow Dake to extradite 2 of the suspects. 114 Unable to find justice in the courts for his brother's murder, Wyatt Earp began a vendetta, and killed Florentino Cruz on March 22, 1882 at a wood camp near South Pass of the Dragoon Mountains. Smuggling and cattle rustling. From early in the history of Pima County, bandits used the border between the United States and Mexico to raid across in one direction and use the other as sanctuary. In December 1878, and again the next year, Mexican authorities complained about American outlaw cowboys who stole Mexican beef and resold it in Arizona. The Arizona Citizen reported that both U.S. and Mexican bandits were stealing horses from the Santa Cruz Valley and selling the livestock in Sonora, Mexico. Arizona Territorial Governor Fremont investigated the Mexican government's allegations and accused them in turn of allowing outlaws to use Sonora as a base of operations for raiding into Arizona. The Clanton and McClory clans were among those allegedly involved in the clandestine cross-border livestock smuggling from Sonora into Arizona. The illegal cattle operations kept beef prices lower and provided cheap stock that helped small ranchers get by. Many early Tombstone residents looked the other way when it was only Mexicans being robbed. The Clanton family led by Newman Haynes Clanton had a ranch about 15 miles, 24 kilometers, southeast of Tombstone that was a way station for stolen Mexican beef. He was assisted by his sons Ike, Billy, and Finn Clanton. Frank and Tom McClory had a ranch outside of Tombstone that they used to buy and resell stolen Mexican cattle. On July 25, 1880, Captain Joseph H. Hurst requested the assistance of Deputy U.S. Marshal Virgil Earp, who brought Wyatt and Morgan Earp, as well as Wells Fargo agent Marshall Williams, to track the thieves of 6 U.S. Army mules stolen from Camp Rucker. This was a federal matter because the animals were U.S. property. They found the animals on the McClory's ranch on the Babacomari River and the branding iron used to change the U.S. brand to D8. To avoid bloodshed, Cowboy Frank Patterson promised to return the mules, so the posse withdrew. The cowboys showed up 2 days later without the mules and laughed at Captain Hearst and the Earps. Hearst responded by printing and distributing a handbill describing the theft and promising a reward for the trial and conviction of the thieves. He specifically charged Frank McClory with assisting with the theft. It was reprinted in the Epitaph on July 30, 1880. Frank McClory angrily printed a response in the cowboy-friendly Newgate, calling Hearst a coward, a vagabond, a rascal, and a malicious liar. In late 1879, one of Wyattup's prized horses named Dick Naylor was stolen 129. Almost a year later he got a tip that it had been seen at the Clanton Ranch near Charleston. Earp rode out to their ranch and spotted the horse. Ike Clanton and his brother Billy were both present. Earp returned with Holiday to recover the horse. On the way, they overtook Bean, who was riding in a wagon. Bean was also heading to the ranch to serve an election hearing subpoena on Ike Clanton. Pleasant Valley War. At the start of the Pleasant Valley War, a notorious feud that took place in Arizona's Tonto Basin from 1882 to 1892, the smuggler Neil McLeod left Globe, Arizona for Cochise County. Many Cochise County cattle dealers were losing cattle and horses to thieves that T.W. Ailes described as an organized band whose connections seemed to extend to and over the Mexican border. In the middle of 1881, the Mexican military dropped taxes on alcohol and tobacco and began vigorously pursuing the cowboys. In response, the rustlers increased their stock thefts on the U.S. side of the border. McLeod used boxing matches and wrestling as a cover for his less scrupulous activities of rustling and selling contraband near the Mexican border. Prize fighting had become quite sophisticated in Tombstone, and in October 1883 McLeod beat the then champion Young in 4 rounds and was awarded a $400 prize. McLeod also maintained good relations with Judge Aaron H. Hackney in Globe by helping the judge's friends caught in the feud, including Frederick Russell Burnham, leave the Tonto Basin to hide out in Tombstone. In August 1884, McLeod was assassinated in Nacosar, Sonora, Mexico by James Powers. First Skeleton Canyon Massacre. Skeleton Canyon is located in the Peloncillo Mountains, which straddles the modern Arizona and New Mexico state border. This canyon connects the Animas Valley of New Mexico with the San Simon Valley of Arizona. The first Skeleton Canyon massacres was an attack on Mexican rurales by rustlers in July 1879. They attacked a rancho in northern Sonora, killing several of the inhabitants. After the attack on the rancho, the survivors reported the attacks to Commandant Francisco Neri, and he sent a detachment of rurales out, among them Captain Alfredo Carrillo. The rurales illegally crossed the border into Arizona, and as the rurales entered in the canyon, shots were fired. 3 of the rurales survived the initial onslaught. Then the cowboys executed the rurales leader. The Mexican government protested the killings to President Chester Arthur despite the fact that the Mexican policemen had crossed into a foreign country where they had no jurisdiction. Although the assailants were never positively identified, it was speculated that Old Man Clanton, Ike Clanton, Billy Clanton, Curly Bill Brocius, Johnny Ringo, and Florentino Cruz were the murderers. Governor Fremont asks for militia. Territorial Governor John C. Fremont, who had been the first Republican presidential candidate in 1856, was largely an absentee appointee. But in February 1881 he suggested to the territorial legislature that they fund a state militia to ride against the outlaws and stop the rustling. The legislators hooted down his plan. Second Skeleton Canyon Massacre. In July 1881, Curly Bill Brocius received word that several Mexican smugglers carrying silver were heading to the United States through Skeleton Canyon. Johnny Ringo reported that Curly Bill and several other men including Old Man Clanton, Ike Clanton, Billy Clanton, Frank McClory, Tom McClory, Billy Grounds, and Swing Hunt hid in the rocks high above the trail. As the smugglers rode through the canyon, the murderers opened fire, killing 6 of the 19. The rest were killed as they tried to get away. Guadalupe Canyon Massacre. In August 1881, Mexican Commandant Felipe Neri dispatched troops to the border 110. Some researchers theorize that Mexican rurales led by Captain Alfredo Carrillo, who had survived the Skeleton Canyon Massacre in 1879, led the ambush of the cowboys. They found Old Man Clanton and 6 others bedded down for the night in Guadalupe Canyon with a herd of cattle. The Mexicans waited until dawn and killed 5 of the cowboys. The dead included Old Man Clanton, Charlie Snow, a ranch hand who thought he had heard a bear and was the first killed, Jim Crane, who was wanted for the stagecoach robbery near Tombstone during which Bud Philpott had been murdered, Dick Gray, son of Colonel Mike Gray, and Billy Lang, a cattle rancher. Clanton, Crane, and Gray were either still in their bedrolls or in the act of getting dressed when killed. Lang was the only one who had a chance to fight back. Harry Earnshaw, a milk farmer, was grazed by a bullet on the nose. Billy Byers feigned death until the soldiers left 97-98. Tombstone Marshal killed. On October 28, 1880, Tombstone Town Marshal Fred White was trying to break up a group of late revelers shooting at the Moon on Allen Street in Tombstone. He attempted to confiscate the pistol of Curly Bill Brocius and was shot in the abdomen. Wyatt Earp buffaloed Brocius, knocking him unconscious, and arrested him. Wyatt told his biographer many years later that he thought Brocius was still armed at the time and had not noticed that Brocius' pistol was already on the ground. The pistol contained only 1 expended cartridge and 5 live rounds. Brocius waived a preliminary hearing so he and his case could be transferred to Tucson District Court. White died 2 days after his shooting, changing Brocius' charge to murder. On December 27, 1880, Wyatt testified that he thought the shooting was accidental. It was also demonstrated that Brocius' pistol could be fired from half-cock. Fred White also left a statement before he died that the shooting was not intentional. The judge released Brocius, but Brocius retained bitterness towards Earp for the rough treatment he got when arrested. Elections and ballot stuffing. Pima County Sheriff Democrat Charles A. Scheibel appointed Wyatt Earp as a Pima County Deputy Sheriff on July 27, 1880. Wyatt did his job well, and from August through November his name was mentioned nearly every week by the Epitaph or the Nugget newspapers. Pima County Sheriff. Scheibel ran for re-election in the November 2, 1880, against Republican Bob Paul. The region was strongly Republican 158 and Paul was expected to win. Whoever won would likely appoint someone from the same political party. Republican Wyatt expected he would continue in the job. Johnny Ringo attended the Democratic Party convention in Pima County and got himself elected as a delegate for San Simon/Cienega Precinct 27, located in San Simon Valley in northern Cochise County. This was despite the fact he'd shot Lewis Hancock, the brother-in-law to James Hayes, a member of the Committee of Credentials, only a few months before. He persuaded the Pima County Board of Supervisors to make the house of rustling buddy Joe Hill the polling place and himself and Ike Clanton as election officials 124, but when the supervisors learned that Joe Hill had already moved, they moved the polling place to the home of John McGill and removed Johnny Ringo and Ike Clanton as election officials, but it was too late 125 on the day of the election in. James C. Hancock reported that Cowboys Curly Bill Brocius and Ringo served as election officials in the San Simon precinct. However, on June 1, the day before the election, Ringo biographer David Johnson places Ringo in New Mexico with Ike Clanton. Curly Bill had been arrested and jailed in Tucson on October 28 for killing Sheriff Fred White, and he was still there on election day. A mysterious Henry Johnson was responsible for certifying the ballots. This turned out to be James Johnson, the same James K. Johnson who had been shooting up Allen Street the night Marshall White was killed. Moreover, he was the same Johnson that testified at Curly Bill's preliminary hearing after he shot Fred White. James Johnson later testified for Bud Paul in the election hearing and said that the ballots had been left in the care of Finn Clanton. None of the witnesses during the election hearing reported on ballots being cast for dogs. They gathered the dozen or so legal voters in town and coerced them to vote for Scheibel. Then they gathered non-voters like the children and Chinese and had them cast ballots. Not satisfied, they named all the dogs, burros, and poultry and cast ballots in their names for Scheibel. The San Simon precinct turned out an amazing 104 votes, 103 of them for Scheibel. Democrat Scheibel was unexpectedly re-elected by a margin of 58 votes. He immediately appointed Johnny Bean as the new deputy sheriff for the Tombstone region of Pima County. Wyatt, also a Republican, supported Paul and resigned as deputy sheriff on November 9. Scheibel immediately appointed Bean as the new South Pima deputy sheriff. Paul and Earp checked the ballots and were suspicious to see that 108 out of 109 voters in Precinct 27 had voted for Scheibel. On November 19, Paul filed suit and accused Scheibel of ballot stuffing. The trial was transferred to Tucson's District Court and began in January 17. On January 20, 1881, the Arizona Star reported, "There has been some big cheating somewhere, and by some persons." It was clear that there had been reckless counting at Tombstone, fraud at San Simon and a careless election board at Tres Alamos. A recount was held and this time Paul had 402 votes and Scheibel had 354. Judge C.G.W. French ruled in Paul's favor in late January, 1881, throwing the whole precinct out, but Scheibel appealed, preventing Paul from taking office until April 1881. However, the eastern portion of Pima County had been split off to form Cochise County on February 1. This prevented Paul from appointing Earp as deputy sheriff for the Tombstone area of Pima County. Cochise County Sheriff. When Cochise County was initially formed, both Wyatt Earp and Johnny Bean sought the new sheriff's position. It was a lucrative job, far beyond its salary. The sheriff was not only responsible for enforcing the law but was also county assessor, tax collector, and responsible for collecting prostitution, gambling, liquor, and theater fees. The county supervisors allowed the sheriff to keep 10% of all amounts paid 161:157. This made the job worth more than $40,000 a year, about $1,014,345 today. Democrat Johnny Bean had considerably more political experience than Republican Wyatt Earp. Bean had previously served as Yavapai County Sheriff from 1871 to 1873. He had been elected to the Arizona Territorial Legislature twice, representing Yavapai Country in the 7th Territorial Legislature in 1873:511 and Mojave County in the 10th in 1879-514. Bean moved for a time to the Northwest Arizona Territory where he served as the Mojave County Recorder in 1877 and then Deputy Sheriff of Mojave County at Gillett, in 1879. Furthermore, Bean's partner in the Dexter livery, John Dunbar, had a brother Thomas who served in the Arizona Territorial Legislature. Thomas Dunbar introduced the bill that split Cochise County off from Pima County in the far southeast corner of the territory, and he became known as the father of Cochise County. The Dunbar family in their hometown of Bangor, Maine, were close family friends of the powerful Senator James G. Blaine, also from Bangor, and one of the most powerful Republican congressmen of his time. 161 The Dunbars used their influence to help Bean get appointed sheriff of the new Cochise County, in February 1881-76. Bien utilized his existing position and his superior political connections to lobby hard for the position. The office was appointed by the territorial governor and confirmed by the territorial legislature. Wyatt also had other interests, including a claim in the Vizina mine, water rights proposals, and a 1/4 interest in the Oriental Hotel where they ran the faro concession at the Oriental Saloon. Bien made a deal with Earp. He promised Wyatt a position as his undersheriff if he was appointed over Wyatt. Earp withdrew his name from the political contest. Bien used the influence. Bien had previously served as Yavapai County Sheriff from 1871 to 1873. He had been elected to the Arizona Territorial Legislature twice, representing Yavapai Country in the 7th Territorial Legislature in 1873-511 and Mojave County in the 10th in 1879-514. Bien moved for a time to the Northwest Arizona Territory where he served as the Mojave County Recorder in 1877 and then Deputy Sheriff of Mojave County at Gillette, in 1879. When Cochise County was formed, Governor John C. Fremont appointed and the territorial legislature approved Bien as sheriff and John Dunbar as the first Cochise County treasurer on February 10, 1881. Bien reneged on his deal with Earp and appointed prominent Democrat Harry Woods instead. Later that year, Bien gave a contrived explanation of his actions during the hearings after the gunfight at the OK Corral. He said he broke his promise to appoint Earp because of an incident shortly before his appointment. Searching for a horse stolen in late 1879, Wyatt learned about a year later that the horse was in nearby Charleston. Wyatt spotted Billy Clanton attempting to remove the horse from a corral and retrieved it without trouble. Bien was in the area to serve a subpoena on Ike Clanton. Ike was hopping mad when Bien finally found him, for Earp had told Clanton that Bien had taken a posse of 9 men down there to arrest him. Bien took offense at Wyatt's tactics and changed his mind about appointing Wyatt. Holliday reported in an interview in 1882 that from that time a coolness grew up between the two men. 164. Virgil Earp loses election. Deputy U.S. Marshal Virgil Earp ran against Ben Sippy, a part-time policeman, for the job of Tombstone City Marshal. Sippy ran ads in the Democrat and Cowboy Loyal Nougat, but Virgil didn't get the support he expected from John Clum and the Republican The Epitaph. To Virgil's surprise, he lost, by a margin of 311 to 259. Notable shootouts. On April 6, 1880, only 2 months after he arrived, Tombstone resident George Parsons wrote in his diary, "Several more shooting scrapes, but they are of such frequent occurrence that their novelty has ceased." Cochise County became well known for the dozens of shootings, duels, and public gunfights, many between famous Old West lawmen and outlaws, that occurred within its boundaries. Gunfight at the OK Corral. On October 26, 1881, Town Marshal and Deputy U.S. Marshal Virgil Earp led his brothers and deputies Wyatt and James along with Doc Holliday in a confrontation with 5 outlaw cowboys, Wesley Fuller, Tom and Frank McClory, Billy Claiborne and Ike Clanton. The cowboys were armed in violation of a city ordinance prohibiting carrying weapons in town. This shootout became famous as the gunfight at the OK Corral. Wes Fuller, Ike Clanton, and Billy Claiborne ran from the fight unharmed, but Billy Clanton and both McClory brothers were killed. It took place at about 3 p.m. on October 26, 1881, in Tombstone, Arizona Territory of the United States. Although only 3 men were killed during the gunfight, it is generally regarded as the most famous gunfight in the history of the Old West. Despite its name, the gunfight began in a 15-20 feet, 4.66.1 m, wide empty lot or alley on Fremont Street, between C.S. Fly's lodging house and photographic studio and the McDonald Assay House. The lot was 6 doors east of an alleyway that served as the OK Corral's rear entrance. The two opposing parties were initially only about 6 feet, 1.8 m, apart. About 30 shots were fired in 30 seconds. Ike Clanton and Billy Claiborne ran from the fight, unharmed. Frank and Tom McClory and Billy Clanton were killed. Morgan Earp, Virgil Earp, and Doc Holliday were wounded and survived. Ike Clanton filed murder charges against Doc Holliday and the Earps, and after a month-long preliminary hearing they were exonerated. The Earps and Doc Holliday were charged by Billy Clanton's brother, Ike Clanton, with murder but were eventually exonerated by a local judge after a 30-day preliminary hearing and then again by a local grand jury. The so-called cowboy faction allegedly targeted the Earps for assassination over the next 6 months, which led to a series of killings and retributions, often with federal and county lawmen supporting different sides of the conflict. The series of battles became known as the Earp Vendetta Ride. The Earps and Doc Holliday left Arizona and the cowboy element was less of a threat from that point forward. Death of jealous husband. In mid-June 1880, buckskin Frank Leslie, who had an eye for the ladies, escorted Mary Killen, the commercial hotel's house.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.